For the past couple of years, Sony has been pushing Rise of the Ronin hard at their showcases, and I've always found their partnership with Team Ninja for this game to be a little peculiar. Team Ninja is a talented studio, and there's a precedent for them partnering with PlayStation, as Sony published the Neo games for them. But with Rise of the Ronin being an open world game set in historical Japan, it shares some striking similarities with one of PlayStation's biggest breakout hits of the last generation, Ghost of Tsushima. Sure, they take place in distant time periods from one another, with Ronin taking place in the mid-1800s during the final years of the Edo period, and the events of Ghost occurring in 1274, but when you look at these two games on paper, it's hard not to compare them. And in its many showings, Rise of the Ronin did look a bit like a poor man's Ghost of Tsushima, so I always struggled to gauge how good I expected Rise of the Ronin to be. My interest level in Rise of the Ronin teetered between curious and ambivalent from trailer to trailer, so I went in open-minded, but not overly excited. And I will say right off the bat that Rise of the Ronin surpassed my expectations, though that's not to say that it's an amazing game by any stretch. Rise of the Ronin features stellar combat, satisfying traversal mechanics, and interesting incorporations of real-world historical figures in its story. But Rise of the Ronin's open world is filled with generic activities that we've seen done a million times before. Its visuals look last gen, and it doesn't address the problems found in Team Ninja's prior games, once again featuring an unsatisfying gear system that bloats Rise of the Ronin with an overabundance of meaningless feeling loot. If you're like me and are down for a game where you can tick off boxes in an open world while listening to a podcast, look no further than Rise of the Ronin. But if you're someone who's burnt out on this style of open world game, and you're looking for something that moves the needle for the genre in a meaningful way, Rise of the Ronin likely won't be for you. Being set during the mid-1800s, Rise of the Ronin takes place during a fascinating part of Japanese history. This is just after Japan was forced to reopen its borders after shutting itself off from the rest of the world for over 250 years. This also places Rise of the Ronin in the years leading up to the Boshin War, as the brewing tensions between the militaristic shogunate government controlling Japan and the various factions looking to overthrow them are reaching a boiling point. So this was an incredibly tumultuous time for Japan. Rise of the Ronin's story centres around the Twin Blades, two warriors who were taken in and trained by the leader of an anti-shogunate faction, the Veiled Edge, after their family was slaughtered by agents of the government. And you'll get to create both of these characters in Rise of the Ronin's fairly robust character creator. Rise of the Ronin opens with the Twin Blades being sent to assassinate Matthew Perry, the American naval officer, not the recently deceased Friends star. Unfortunately, the mission goes off the rails when a mysterious ninja known only as the Blue Demon shows up, quickly overpowering both the protagonist and their twin blade, lopping off your twin blade's arm and seemingly sending them to their death, leaving your character to return home to lick their wounds. But upon hearing that their twin blade is still alive, the protagonist deserts their cause, forcing them into a battle to the death with their master to become a Ronin, a lone wanderer on a quest to find their twin blade and get their revenge against the Blue Demon. As I mentioned, Matthew Perry is a character in Rise of the Ronin and plays a fairly significant role, though he's far from the only real-world historical figure featured in the game. This infusion of real history is one of the coolest aspects of Rise of the Ronin. As I played, I found myself constantly googling the names of characters I encountered, and I was shocked by how many of them were based on real people. So it's clear that Team Ninja meticulously researched this chapter of Japan's history when developing Rise of the Ronin. Rise of the Ronin takes place in a period of turmoil for Japan, and it's up to you to decide whether you'll side with the shogunate or the anti-shogunate factions looking to overthrow the government. The choices you make and who you ally yourself with will alter the direction of Rise of the Ronin's story, causing it to branch out in different directions during key story beats. Though thanks to a generous chapter select, it's easy to go back and see the other outcomes, letting you play any side content your decisions locked you out of in your playthrough. This means nothing is truly missable if you want to get the platinum in one playthrough like I did. One awesome touch in Rise of the Ronin is that whenever you're presented with a choice, you're able to see what percentage of players chose each option. I love when games let you see this kind of stat, because I'm always curious about how others choose to play games. Rise of the Ronin's overarching story isn't terrible, and it deals with some fascinating concepts, like the increasing influence the Western world had on Japan during this time, but Ronin's story is told in a disappointingly generic fashion, with its writing often feeling very dry. We've certainly seen games like Ghost of Tsushima, and even many of the Assassin's Creed games, use the medium of historical fiction to tell more compelling stories. A large part of the blandness stems from Rise of the Ronin's lack of memorable characters. Sure, there were a couple of characters I liked, namely Ryoma Sakamoto, a fellow wanderer you ally yourself with very early in Rise of the Ronin, and the cat-loving geisha Yusugomo Daio. But Rise of the Ronin has a lot of characters, and very few of them make an impact. There are points in Rise of the Ronin where the game will try to hit you with an emotional beat, but these moments fall flat when you have no investment in the characters. This stands out all the more having recently come off of games like Persona 3 Reload and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, where I was deeply invested in practically every member of those casts. Rise of the Ronin also features a relationship system where you befriend people, deepening your bonds with them by choosing the dialogue options they'd want to hear and giving them gifts. Between Rise of the Ronin, Persona 3 Reload, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and the upcoming Dragon Age The Veilguard and Metaphor ReFantasio, I guess 2024 is the year of bonds, huh? As your bond level increases with each of these characters, you gain access to new loyalty missions with them, where you'll learn more about each of them as you help them with their problems, and these missions feature some of the better storytelling found in Rise of the Ronin. There are also romance options in Rise of the Ronin, but these relationships feel entirely arbitrary. Maybe it's because I've recently come off of a Persona game where you have to complete a 10-episode social link with a character before pursuing a romance, but in Rise of the Ronin, I give someone a couple of gifts and talk to them a few times, and suddenly they want to run off with me. It's such a bizarre and unnecessary inclusion, because most of Ronin's characters don't have the depth to justify a system like this. Unlike Team Ninja's prior historically based games, Rise of the Ronin is somewhat grounded in reality, and therefore doesn't include any supernatural elements. There are no monsters or demons like you'd find in Nioh, though there are inexplicably just gigantic enemies wandering around who seem way bigger than any normal person should ever be. But hey, we'll just ignore that. At one time, Team Ninja was synonymous with character action games, and I fell in love with this studio because of their Ninja Gaiden games. Ninja Gaiden Black is still one of my favourite games of all time, but in the modern day, Team Ninja is more associated with Souls-likes, due to them developing the likes of Nioh and Wolong Fallen Dynasty. Rise of the Ronin sees Team Ninja once again reinventing themselves, as Rise of the Ronin is not a Souls-like, but an open world game, which I was relieved to see when Rise of the Ronin was announced. Don't get me wrong, I love Souls games, but the genre is becoming far too oversaturated. Even though Rise of the Ronin isn't a Souls-like, it still retains many ideas popularised by Souls games. For instance, Rise of the Ronin still has an equivalent to Souls called Karma. This is the currency used to level up your character, and if you die, you'll drop the karma you have on hand and enter a vendetta with the enemy that killed you, and you'll have to go back and fight them to get your karma back. Though you won't have to defeat them to regain your karma in Ronin, just dealing a sufficient amount of damage will earn it back, which is just one of many ways Rise of the Ronin is more forgiving than other Team Ninja games. Once you've stored up enough karma, you can convert it into a skill point by interacting with a banner, Rise of the Ronin's bonfire equivalent. You can then spend these skill points for new combat abilities, extra health, and even persuasion skills for conversation that allow you to threaten or smooth talk your way out of trouble, which wasn't something I was expecting to find in Rise of the Ronin. Banners also act as fast travel points, and resting at one will refill your health as well as certain items, and you guessed it, resting at one of these banners will also respawn every standard enemy in the area. Another thing Team Ninja is synonymous with is gruelingly difficult games. Even before they were in the realm of Souls-likes, this was always a tenet of their games, with Ninja Gaiden Black being famous for its punishing difficulty. But Rise of the Ronin is nowhere near as difficult as Team Ninja's prior games, which makes it their most approachable game yet. It might take a couple of hours to master the parry fully, but after that, you'll likely breeze through the majority of Rise of the Ronin's fights. There are a handful of more challenging fights in the tail end of Rise of the Ronin, but none that are even remotely as punishing as Neo or Ninja Gaiden. There are no fights in Rise of the Ronin that will have you beating your head against a wall, retrying dozens of times to get through, and even when you do die, the load times are near instant, so death never feels particularly punishing. Rise of the Ronin does offer various difficulty settings though, so you can bump it up to hard if you're seeking more of a challenge, and after completing the story, you'll gain access to the extra hard midnight difficulty if you're craving a more sadistic experience. Combat is what Team Ninja does best, so unsurprisingly, Rise of the Ronin's greatest strength is its excellent feeling, blood-drenched combat. I was kinda surprised by just how gory Rise of the Ronin is. Heads and limbs fly everywhere in a flurry of violent slashes as you shred through groups of enemies. Combat is another area where Rise of the Ronin remains deeply influenced by the Souls genre. As you'd expect if you've played other Team Ninja games, Rise of the Ronin's combat has a heavy emphasis on parrying and managing your stamina bar, as well as wearing down the stamina of your opponents to leave them vulnerable for brutal finishing moves. I love this style of combat in games. Nothing is more satisfying to me than a good parry mechanic, and that's undeniably something that Rise of the Ronin brings to the table. At first, Ronin's parry felt a little finicky to me, and it doesn't quite have the same responsiveness as something like Sekiro, but once I got the rhythm down, I was tearing through groups of enemies. Plus, you can deflect bullets with your sword, which sets your blade aflame, and is there anything cooler than that? Like Team Ninja's prior games, Rise of the Ronin offers a varied selection of weapons to choose from, and you'll be able to have 2 weapons equipped at any time to hot swap between on the fly. There are polearms, katanas, twin swords, spears, odachi, sabers, greatswords, and my personal favourite, oxtail blades. I always go for a faster weapon in melee-focused games, and I love how agile you are when using an oxtail blade, bouncing around the environment from enemy to enemy in a haze of slashes. You also have access to various bows and period-appropriate firearms, like rifles, pistols, and even a flamethrower if you need to take enemies out from afar. I'm far from a weapons expert, but even I know that Team Ninja likely took some liberties here with these weapons and how quickly they can be reloaded. However, this was certainly the right call, as this is a video game after all, and realism should seldom be prioritised over ensuring your game is a fun, engaging experience. Rise of the Ronin's assortment of weapons feel drastically different to wield, which gives combat an impressive degree of variety. Whenever I was getting in a rut and finding myself getting bored in combat encounters, I'd mix up my weapon loadout, and it never failed to liven things up again. In Rise of the Ronin, you have a grapple that's used for both traversal and combat purposes. You can use it to grab objects around the environment and fling them at enemies to throw them off balance, or to leap into the air and pull yourself to an enemy, instantly closing the distance between you and them as you launch straight into a combo, which feels fantastic. During Rise of the Ronin's missions, you're frequently accompanied by AI-controlled allies, and you're often free to choose which allies join you. You can also switch over to controlling these allies directly at any point, and as these allies more often than not have drastically different weapons and combat styles to your own, this lets you explore different playstyles, lending even more variety to combat, and also allows you to get the upper hand if you run into an enemy type that would be better approached with a different weapon than what your character is currently equipped with. Rise of the Ronin's combat is very deliberate and rewards patience over button mashing, but it still lets you throw caution to the wind and go ham now and then. As you fight, you'll fill up a charge bar that once full allows you to enter a powered up state where your attacks not only deal more damage, but drain far less stamina as well, meaning you can go to town on enemies with relentless strings of attacks without worrying about running out of stamina and leaving yourself vulnerable. If you prefer to take a less direct approach to enemy encounters, you're also free to tackle most of them stealthily in Rise of the Ronin, and Rise of the Ronin's stealth feels every bit as good as its sword-clashing combat. You can sneak up on enemies and assassinate them, pick them off from a distance with a bow, or skulk along rooftops, pulling enemies to their death with your grappling hook as they stumble in range below. I think it's an especially nice touch that if you sneak up on a hostile hog or dog and then press triangle, you'll pet it and turn it friendly rather than killing it. One major gripe I have with Rise of the Ronin, and Team Ninja games in general for that matter, as it's something that I dislike about the Neo games and Stranger of Paradise as well, is that these games just vomit loot at you. Rise of the Ronin's loot feels meaningless, as you're picking it up constantly and swapping out your equipment every 10 minutes, never growing attached to any of it. I want to feel like I earned something cool by completing an important mission or triumphing over a powerful foe, but that never happens in Rise of the Ronin because all of its gear feels disposable. Rise of the Ronin is so out of control with its loot that within the first 2 hours of play, I'd somehow already accrued 80 pieces of gear. This leads to endless micromanagement as you're constantly dismantling and selling objects by the hundreds. The aspect of Rise of the Ronin's gameplay shown in its trailers that truly piqued my interest was its diverse methods of traversing its world. You've got a horse, a glider, and a trusty grappling hook to help you navigate the environment. Team Ninja has thoughtfully placed grapple points all over the environment to open up interesting traversal opportunities. You'll even find them underwater, allowing you to quickly grapple around rather than slowly swimming to points of interest concealed in the depths. The best part of Rise of the Ronin's traversal is how it allows you to combine all the tools it provides you with in satisfying ways. You can pull yourself to a rooftop with your grappling hook, then leap into the air, open your glider and gracefully soar through the sky, before whistling for your horse and landing directly on their back as they charge forward, all in one smooth sequence. Rise of the Ronin's open world allows you to explore a large swath of the Japanese countryside, as well as major metropolises based on real-world locations, like Kyoto and Yokohama, and all these locations are filled with distractions to keep you busy. Most of these side activities are your standard open world fodder. You'll be restoring public order by clearing out camps of raiders, taking photos of landmarks, praying at shrines for skill points, hunting down powerful fugitives, petting cats, and completing various glider challenges and shooting ranges. You can also go to gambling dens, though all you can play is odds and evens, which is probably period accurate, but let's be honest, watching someone shake a cup of dice and betting on if the number will be odd or even isn't a particularly engaging game, is it? It's all very Ubisoft, and that sort of map clearing either works for you or it doesn't. I'm down for a few games like this a year, where I can zone out and listen to podcasts while ticking off boxes. But like I do with many modern open world games, I grew fatigued with just how bloated Rise of the Ronin's map is. Rise of the Ronin's side activities aren't bad, but they lack substance, and feel like they're purely there to pad out the runtime, something that stands out all the more having recently come off of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, a game with exceptional side content, and there are simply too many instances of each activity. Why are there 100 cats to pet in this game? Sure, the petting animations are cute, but you're gonna be sick of seeing them after the first 20 cats you find. Half the number of all these side activities, and Rise of the Ronin would be a much tighter and better overall experience. It's worth noting that Rise of the Ronin's missions support online co-op, but this isn't something I dabbled with, as I prefer to play this kind of game solo, so I can take my time thoroughly exploring the environments at my own pace, without feeling like I'm annoying the shit out of whoever is playing with me. Let's address the elephant in the room, Rise of the Ronin's visuals. Ronin's graphics have been a big point of contention in the online discourse surrounding the game. Right off the bat, I want to say that Rise of the Ronin isn't as hideous as some people on Twitter are making it out to be. But with that being said, it's also not exactly a looker, and undeniably looks like a PS4 game. From a distance, everything looks fine, but once you get too close to anything, you notice how low-res most of the texture work in Rise of the Ronin is. Something similar is also true of Rise of the Ronin's character models, which look good at a glance thanks to the well-modelled faces that feature very lifelike human eyes, but unfortunately, the character models are let down by stiff, unnatural facial animation, which frequently lands Rise of the Ronin in uncanny valley territory. In terms of performance, Rise of the Ronin usually runs at a sturdy 60 FPS, maintaining this frame rate while in combat, which is crucial for an action game like this. But there are times when using the glider or exploring towns where the frame rate dips well below 60 FPS. Ronin is also plagued with constant pop-in, with plants popping up all around you at the last second as you run through the countryside on horseback. The AI can also be a little buggy, and on more than one occasion, I came across enemies who were stuck walking into walls. One final bone I have to pick with Rise of the Ronin is its blatant use of invisible walls. There are several locations across its world where it looks like you should be able to freely climb over an obstacle, only for you to bump into an invisible wall when you attempt to climb it. Invisible walls are the most inelegant solution for restricting player movement, and most studios have completely moved on from using them, so it's jarring whenever you run into them in a modern game, especially in a big AAA release like Rise of the Ronin. On a more positive note, Rise of the Ronin's music is excellent, and for some reason, I haven't heard anyone talking about how good the score is. It's filled with grand, cinematic tracks that lend Rise of the Ronin the same grandiose feeling as the historical epics that no doubt inspired it. Despite selling respectably, Rise of the Ronin still seems to be flying under the radar without getting the props it deserves. I think this is partially due to the inevitable comparisons to Ghost of Tsushima, which were admittedly unflattering for Rise of the Ronin, but Ronin still has a lot to offer in its own right. While Rise of the Ronin's storytelling, performance, and bloated open world leave something to be desired, its core gameplay is great, with Rise of the Ronin's stylish combat and kinetic traversal mechanics making it worth a look if you're in the market for an open world game. Just don't expect to find anything too revolutionary within it. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. You can find countless other videos on my channel, including my recent reviews of Persona 3 Reload and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And be sure to stay tuned for my upcoming reviews of Stellar Blade and Senua's Saga Hellblade 2.